Welcome everybody to Alta Pro CLE Live. My name is Jay Reeves. I am the Risk Pro for the Alta Pro RPG. And one of my very favorite jobs as Risk Pro is hosting these CLE webinars. I always learn something, I meet interesting people, and I can tell you that when we started these programs, as Todd said, it's been 4 years now. When we started, we knew we wanted to do great programs that were actually interesting and not death by PowerPoint. And we wanted to have top speakers and top topics, but we were unsure how successful they would be because there's a lot of competition out there. Well, we have passed the 2,500 CLE hour mark. That's 2,500 folks who have gotten free CLE as members of the Alta Pro RPG, and that's counting. So we are very proud of that. It's certainly a team effort. Todd is our showrunner. Experts like Colleen have made these go-to programs, but the most important component is you folks out there across the country who show up and attend these, and you will hopefully ask your questions in the Q&A box, and you will answer the polling questions that we're going to throw out there because we want to hear from you and make these programs interactive. So thank you so much for showing up. With that, I am going to pass the baton to our guest speaker. She's a friend of mine, a lawyer, a mediator. She's lots of things, but I like the way she breaks wellness, which can be a little woo-woo sometimes for some lawyers, I guess. She breaks it down into sort of common sense and uses science and facts and language that we lawyers can more easily understand, perhaps. So I will say thanks for being here, Colleen, and pass it right over to you.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me, Alta Pro. Glad to have everyone in the audience. I'll reiterate what Jay said, which is please put your questions in the Q&A. We would love to have this be interactive and be as valuable to you as possible. My approach to wellness comes from hitting near burnout, right? So my approach to wellness is having been in the trenches like many of you, hitting a wall and then thinking we've got to figure out a better process, a better way for us to sustain this practice so that we don't all burn out, because surely that's not going to help our clients, in any way, shape, or form, right? I joke a lot when I speak about, how many of you have ended up on the side of the road with an empty gas tank, right? Are you accomplishing anything when you're stuck on the side of the road other than wanting to bang your head against the steering wheel? No, right? And I remember when I had my first child many years ago, and we flew for the first time, and I had her on my lap because she was little, and the PA comes on and says, put your own oxygen mask on before helping others. And I had this visceral reaction of, are you kidding me? I'm gonna get in front of a moving train for this baby, right? I'm going to protect her first and foremost. And it took a long time for me to realize, to sort of get out of that ingrained culture that we have as lawyers of go, 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 do, put everyone else first, to realize that I am not able to serve others, whoever they may be, my family, my clients, my friends, if I am literally not having any oxygen or on the side of the road without gas. And so I'm excited to be here today and talk a little bit about sort of the state of the union with regard to lawyer well-being, some of the brain science that is sort of, once we unlock it, we realize, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense, why we do the things we do, and then how we can work with our brains to maybe improve our well-being.
Colleen, the phrase that jumped out at me as I listened to you is self-care. And it's something we aren't, at least I wasn't taught at my very fine law school, the University of South Carolina Law School, many, many, many years ago. We weren't taught much about self-care that I recall. And none of my employers talked a whole lot about that when I was a young lawyer. And I have also found that many lawyers put themselves last. You mentioned that. Because we care for our clients, we care for our families, and we want to do a great job. And, so self-care gets put to the back shelf. And one of the points of this program is let's pull it out and put it right here in front of us and we'll all be better for it. So with that, let's bring the audience in, because I think it's interesting to find out, how do you view your own state of well-being? It may be easy for me to look at someone and make a judgment, but the important question is, how do you view your own well-being? So if we've got the first question, Mike, can you? Here we go. How have you been coping in the last month? Check all that may apply. And this is sort of a reflection, perhaps, of your state of well-being, right, Colleen? If your job is sucking the life out of you, the good parts out of you, I mean, it's probably worth taking a look.
Yeah, that's right. There's a difference between sort of what I'm going to call normal stress, right? It's very stressful to be a lawyer, versus chronic stress that you can never recover from. Um, and so, things to pay attention to are, how frequently are you checking yes to these boxes, right? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it that you take a week vacation and you still check all these boxes, right? So there's a self-awareness piece that is critical to identifying where we are so that we can figure out a plan for going forward. If self-care doesn't resonate with you, I know with a lot of lawyers that phrase is either overused or it feels too nebulous. Try self-advocacy, because that's really what self-care means to me. And we're very good at advocating for our clients, and so we know how to do it. We just need to remember that we are an important client of our own as well.
Great point. Great point. You mentioned that sometimes it takes a crash in our lives. I can attest to that. And it doesn't have to be a major crash. Can be minor bumps, sometimes everyday minor bumps, to sort of jolt me back into a little more self-awareness. But to me, that's the whole name of the game, is being able to see where you're at honestly. And when you're so busy, working so much, and so much demands at home and at work, and working from home, you're never off duty. You're always at work. So it's easy to lose track of your number one client. And I get why lawyers don't like using some of this language, or it may be uncomfortable, but treat yourself the way you treat your clients and your loved ones. Okay, so we've got some results, and Colleen, let's see here.
Yeah, you said the awareness piece and the jolting. So my children are great at helping me to be self-aware. They're great mirror holders, right? So and then speaking of jolting, so when my youngest was like 2, I had left a cup of coffee, um, hot coffee, on a table somewhere, and I rounded the corner and she had it in her little hands, and I think she was trying to bring it to me, right? But I instantly freaked out, thinking that she was going to burn herself with hot coffee, and had that strong reaction. And then of course we had to debrief from it, because she was crying, and then her little 2-year-old voice said, "Mommy, you yell at me and I cry." Right? And so it can be things that are non-work related that sort of snap you, bring this awareness to you, or sort of show you something it's a pattern that's showing up in your life in other ways, right? Where am I having a knee-jerk reaction? Where am I um, going a million miles an hour all the time, and then not real happy with my interactions? And I think maybe there's some questions coming in the chat. If we could make sure that if the questions need to be answered, if you could put them in the Q&A, um, so that I can try to keep track of the Q&A, and I'm not going to be watching the chat.
Right. Yeah. I just took a look at the chat too, and it's blowing up. It's blowing up. The chat is blowing up. So Q&A is probably better for questions, but we'll take a look at the chat too, because we want to answer your questions. Holding a mirror up to the truth about yourself and what you're doing and how happy you are, I think that's really important. And of course, recovery, that's common language in recovery, to be a mirror, a loving mirror, a caring mirror, not a hostile mirror. So I think that's very important. One thing we did at Alta Pro is we came up with a wellness self audit, and we blogged about it. It's on the website, and it's really kind of a fun test. It's not designed to be any kind of medical or diagnostic tool. It's just a little well-being check-in, because the holiday season is a great time just to take the car in for a little tune-up, right? You're going to be on the road traveling, so once a year it's a good time to check out the old car and have a tune-up. So take a look at the self-audit, the well-being self-audit. That's a way to hold a mirror up and see how you're doing. And if you're not happy with how you're doing, make some changes, and maybe you'll find some clues today on how to start doing that.
Yeah, I love that. So there's been a question about how about distractions caused by what's going on in the world around us, not work related, and that's a huge one, right? Um, there's obviously big big issues going on in Gaza. There's big issues going on in Ukraine. We've come out of a pandemic, right? So there have been seismic issues going on around us for years now. Um, and one is to name it, right? To name what is. So whatever we resist persists. And so if we're feeling like, if we're shoulding all over it, if it shouldn't be bothering us, um, we're judging it and we're not really helping to name it, label it, and figure out a strategy for what's going to work for us. Um, Particularly with the pandemic, which was sort of my first um, big global crisis as a working parent that I've had to navigate. Um, I noticed, so we can talk a little bit about the brain science of it, but I noticed some of my physiological responses. And so I started noticing these reactions, and we'll get into the brain science in a minute. But what I did was notice that I can't, I have to limit my intake of media and news, right? I just had to make a conscious choice to stay off of social media, stay off of news outlets, because it was just too much bombarding of information and it wasn't healthy for me. And so that could be one thing, is to recognize how much you're consuming and maybe try to limit the information that you're consuming. Um, and so the brain science of it is that when we perceive a threat, even if it's not an immediate threat to us, our body goes into fight or flight, right? And so our amygdala is the oldest part of our brain. It's our reptilian brain. It sits at the base of the brain stem, and it's what kept us alive for eons, right? And so that takes over when you go into fight or flight. When you have a threat that you perceive, the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is the more advanced part of our brain that's responsible for rational thinking, problem solving, memory. That part goes offline because it's not needed when you're trying to fight or flee to survive a particular acute situation. So the amygdala hijacks, takes over. Basically, it takes the wheel. You've got a passenger, they take the wheel, and then the amygdala is driving. So your prefrontal cortex goes offline and you're in fight or flight survival mode. Your cortisol levels spike. You can get tunnel vision. So everything narrows to prioritize what your body needs to survive the particular threat. Nowadays, when we read things and consume things from news outlets, that is, our body reacts the same way physiologically. And so if we are in a chronic state of stress, whether that's because you have a boss that's a jerk, or you have a particularly challenging client who you can't seem to get away from, right? I had cases that went on for years and years, or it's stimuli that you're seeing in the news for the tragedies going on in the world. All of that is going to cause this fight or flight. And if you don't have practices that help you come back down, your cortisol levels stay hiked, you're spiked, your stress level stays up, and you're in a state of chronic stress that you never recover from, you're not going to be well. And so some of the antidotes for that, how do you recover? One is mindfulness. We'll talk a little bit about that. Two, exercise. Three, time, right? Just the mere passage of time can be helpful. The science is saying now that it takes at least 20 minutes, a minimum of 20 minutes, for the prefrontal cortex to come back online once it's been hijacked. So I'll pause there because I just went on a a tirade about my brain science stuff that I
You
like
you
geeking
were
out
you
about.
were you were on fire. Your amygdala was on fire. It's good stuff. I love it. I love it. And our attendees do too, because many of them who are here today and were here last year. Couple of comments. Number one, anecdotally, I have had many friends and maybe not many, some friends and acquaintances, perhaps you have as well, who have told me they were intentionally stepping away from social media or internet or just online. They were intentionally going to cut back. And this is just anecdotally. None of them have ever come to me later and said they regretted it or it made their life more miserable or unhappy. So I don't know if it did, but it probably de-stressed or decluttered their life at least somewhat. Two other sort of housekeeping points. We're getting some questions to you, Colleen, about your mediation practice, which is awesome. But those questions you want to ask Colleen off the show. She's here as our wellness person. Good mediation person to talk to as well, though. And then just looking at the comments rather than try to answer them, I just want to read a couple of them. Let them speak. Let our folks speak for themselves. Here's one, and it's to your point, Colleen, about some people recoiling from language of wellness. Here's the comment. Actually, I still keenly remember the partner at my first law firm job. His idea of balance and self-care was I should hire a housekeeper so I could bill more hours. And then another one says, I had two partners at my last evaluation with their firm. They wanted me to return to the good old days when I was working with a colleague until 11, 12, 2 a.m. on client files. So it is a matter of perspective. But in my view, there's a healthy perspective and there's a less healthy perspective. So great. Thank you for your comments and your candor.
Yeah, and it's a cultural issue that continues to need to be addressed in the legal industry, in my opinion. And it's going to take time, right? It's not going to change overnight. But there's increasing dialogue around this issue at a national level. There are national studies that have been done. I would love to see an updated one, right? Because the sort of the biggest, most popular, most impressive study was in 2017, and the ABA convened a task force on lawyer well-being. It was a national task force. It looked at something like 13,000 participants were involved in the study, and it had some striking results about the level of toxicity in our profession, and it had a great set of recommendations for lots of different key stakeholders, depending all the way starting from law school. How are we going to start teaching this differently as we are training lawyers, which is a great place to make sure that we start, to judges, to law firm, stakeholders. And so, there are some recommendations at the national level. There are all sorts of um, lawyers and legal professionals who are doing change management work and coaching and consulting around this to try to help support law firms that want to be a little bit more mindful about it and recognize that it is a demanding profession. And, we want to be profitable. We need to serve our clients, but yet we can't do it to the detriment of the lawyers who are in the profession.
It's a great point. And I'm exhibit A on the change in the profession. And when I began, there was no talk of, I never heard any talk of well-being. There was also no lawyer advertising. There was no internet. There was no, phones were attached to the wall. There was no such thing as working from home, really. So everything has changed, really. And our acceptance of wellness has certainly changed. Absolutely. Whatever language is comfortable for you. If you like getting more physically fit, that's great, although physical is only one part of it. I love a comment here from one of our attendees. It says, people also recoil in our professional world because professionals by nature are emotionally avoidant, just the way most of us are built. Being self-aware is a practice of unto itself. Comment on that, Colleen, as to lawyers being perhaps
Yeah,
sometimes emotionally avoidant or professionals in general?
I so so I actually I do some training and consulting in the non-legal space, and um, it is not nearly as emotionally avoidant in my experience. I can't speak, I can only speak to my experience. And in the experience that I've had, including in Fortune 500 companies, they're not emotionally avoidant, actually. And so I do think that there is something about the analytical nature of law. And so, one, perhaps people who are attracted to law school are analytically driven, right, or tend to be more cerebral and analytical. And then law school just further ingrains that in us, right? And so, really interesting story. In my mediation training, so many years into my legal practice, I took the Myers Briggs personality assessment. And in that assessment, one of the factors is, are you more thinking or feeling, right? Are you a T or an F? And I was 50-50. I was literally, it's a 10 scale, and I was a 5. So I was a literally half and half on thinking and feeling. And so my mediation trainer, who had a sociology background, suggested that it was likely that I leaned more naturally towards the feeling side, but that law school sort of pushed me more towards the thinking side. Um, and so, I am of the opinion that we are feeling beings who occasionally have a rational thought, even though we would like to think that we are thinking beings that occasionally have a feeling.
Good comment. Good comment. And um, we're just getting a lot of good feedback. And thank you, attendees, for weighing in. Somebody mentioned the hyper competitive nature and the type A. Uh, Perhaps we're drawn to the profession, as you mentioned, Colleen, and then perhaps the profession amplifies that in us. But I see several comments talking about that, the cutthroat competitiveness. Um, we're also, I would say, trained, at least I was, to be objective. We're representing people that we may not understand or even like. So I was trained. It's not about your feelings, right? And that was true with everything in the law office, pretty much. Put on a mask when I go to put on my uniform, and acted the way a lawyer should act. And then I get home and think, whew, so glad to be home, It's crazy. No, but most days were great. Anyway, uh, I'm babbling, sorry. It's the Santa hat. It brings all sorts of good tidings and cheer. So I don't know how we're doing for time. We might want to move on to the next. Yeah. Let's move to the next audience question, because we want to hit all three of the topics. The first is, how are you doing? The second is, what's stopping you from making changes, even small, incremental changes? What are the biggest challenges? So finding the time, finances. Here's some options. Let's see what the challenges are. Because Colleen, these challenges, they're very real. I mean, there's only X number of hours in the day, right?
Yeah, so to that point, sort of talking about the micro steps, like the um, micro self care, right? So um, I certainly am guilty of this. That I think to myself, well, I need to sort of do a 180, and I need to do it within a day, right? I need to lose 20 pounds by tomorrow, right? It's this sort of all or nothing, black or white thinking, and it's also a overachieving perfectionistic quality as well, right? And so if we can really think of what are the baby steps, what are the small incremental things that we can do, that's one of the recommendations actually that came out of the National Task Force for lawyer well-being, is to think about what are the little things that we can do. um, what are the what is something I love to sort of say, what is something we can do in less than point one of our day, right? Because surely we all have point one, whether that's use less than 6 minutes on scrolling social media. So instead you can do box breathing, whatever that may be. If we could just add point one for a habit that's going to support our well-being on a daily basis, I bet that would result in a cumulative impact. And I see someone also bringing up the secondary trauma issue, which we hadn't really touched on yet, but it is on my agenda of things to touch on, and it does relate to the brain science that we were talking about, right? And so, secondary trauma or vicarious trauma is that experience of the repeated accumulative exposure to somebody else's suffering, right? And so we think of that typically with first responders, nurses, doctors, ambulance drivers, those types of helping professions, but lawyers are also a helping profession. And whether we represent children or families or businesses, we all experience as lawyers vicarious trauma. It's also called secondary trauma. Another word for it is compassion fatigue, right? And so if we are aware of it, it just helps us to recognize it and name it, and then use some healthy coping mechanisms to address it. If it becomes problematic, then there are trauma informed therapists that I would highly recommend that anyone go spend some time talking with. While we're on the subject of resources, I know more about North Carolina, which is the jurisdiction in which I practice. I suspect there are other resources in other states, but there are risk management groups like lawyers insurance, like Ultra Pro risk management groups. There are local bar groups in North Carolina. There's bar cares as well as lawyers assistance program. There are others in other states that have available resources, that can connect you with resources, and that might even have free resources. So in North Carolina, for instance, you get 3 free visits to a psychologist every calendar year in participating districts, which is all confidential and a great resource, even if it's just hey, I need a tune-up, I need a check-in. But that's specifically about the fact that yes, lawyers experience vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, and we need to be aware of it.
Colleen, I see the results of the poll here. To your point, 20% check the stress of working with people in distress day in and day out. I'm guessing that's a sort of element of compassion
Right,
fatigue.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
And the biggest obstacle seems to be finding time for fitness and for well-being. So any other than the micro self-care tips are, to me, the obvious answer, just bite-sized chunks. But any other suggestions on making or finding time for well-being?
Yeah, so you're not going to like hearing this, but we have the time, right? So we just choose to spend it differently. Um, Everybody has the same amount of time. So it's not the finding time, it's how we're choosing to spend our time. And so we have to have a candid self assessment of it. You can do a time study. We're all used to tracking our time. You can track your time in other ways, right? So you can track your screen time, you can track your social media scrolling time, you can, track your TV time, right? Whatever the case may be, you can track the other things to see, well, this is where I am choosing to spend my time. And so if I spent 30 minutes less in front of the TV or 15 minutes less scrolling my phone, then I would find 45 minutes if I chose to exercise or use that in another way. Right. And so some of it is just sort of the tough love of candidly looking at how we are choosing to spend our time and making a different choice. It's not easy, but it's there. And it's a fallacy to say that we don't have enough time, or it's not a fallacy. It's just we're choosing to put a blinder and look at it a particular way that we could choose a different way of looking at.
Let me ask you about another of the responses here. Almost a quarter of the attendees said maintaining a healthy work-life balance is a problem or a challenge for me. What are your thoughts, Colleen, on the whole notion of work-life balance and at home and at work, and working remotely has messed all that up? What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I think we have to look at how are we defining it, right? It's a similar thing to how do we define success, right? It's a different definition for everybody, and it's a sort of everyone has a different goal, right? And so I would look at how I'm defining it, and I would look at how I'm measuring it. Am I measuring it on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, right? Because I may not achieve my goal of work life balance in a day, in a given day, but then when I look over the week or the month, maybe I have achieved it, right? And so I think I I manage my expectations. I don't expect to hit my goal of work life balance on a daily basis. So that takes the pressure off of me. I've put it on myself. I've sometimes in the past I would add it to my to-do list, right? Here's another way in which I'm failing. I am not achieving work-life balance, but I have put that on myself. So sort of redefining what it looks like and what's my timeline over which it needs to balance, right? Because on a daily basis, maybe it's not going to balance. When my kid has a fever or is throwing up in the middle of the night, it's not going to balance that week, right? So I think reassessing the definition and then figuring out what period of time you're looking at. And then I've seen some in the chat about sort of blocking your calendar. I'm a huge proponent of time blocking, right? And putting it in my calendar. So putting it in my calendar helps me stay accountable. I will often, if it's particularly if it's on a weekend, send it to my husband as a, hey, guess what? I'm going to the gym for this class on Saturday morning and you're watching the kids, right? So that we have sort of everything covered and it's on the calendar and that's my commitment and I've said it out loud and I have an accountability buddy. It's great to have somebody that you exercise with or that is going to help hold you accountable to your goals.
Those are great tips. Thank you. Thank you. As I listened to you, I was thinking that I tend to be results, or I want to see results, and the quicker the better. And it helps me to understand it's a process, and go with the process. I want to draw our attendees' attention to two blogs that really address some of these challenges, because one of them is financial pressure. 15% said that's a problem for me maintaining wellness, the money, I guess. Well, we did a blog post called The Business Case for Boosting or Promoting Well-Being in Your Firm. 225 billion in lost productivity, absenteeism, poor motivation, depression in the workplace. 9 million lost in the legal space for turnover. So there is a business case to be made for keeping your team healthy and motivated. And as to the time constraints, Mike, if you want to drop in a second blog post, a calmer day at work is only a breath away. It goes again to your micro self-care. Maybe just 2 minutes of deep breathing is all it needs, all you need to recalibrate and get back in the game. But check out the blog post. We'll drop them in the links, and I'll shut up and pass it back to you, Colleen.
Yeah, Harvard Business Review has a lot of really fascinating articles, right? And they look at it from a business lens, and often there are studies and data that support their particular conclusion of whatever it is they're writing about. A subscription for Harvard Business Review is not that much, so I find it really interesting. They do all sorts of topics about kindness in the workplace, well-being. So that's a great resource as well. Um, and I think the current research on distractions, right? So um, being pulled away from something is that it takes about 23 minutes to get back focused on what you were working on, whether it's the phone ringing, somebody standing in your doorway, having your email up and the email distracts you from the brief you were writing, or whatever the case may be, is that each time you get pulled away from your task, that you're losing zero point 0.4 or zero point 0.5 of your day potentially in efficiency. And so that's another benefit to time blocking and keeping your email closed and turning notifications off your phone. I mean, you get to control your environment to some extent of what you allow in, at least on your phone and on your desktop. So I turned notification before I was able to let go of closing my email. I at least turned the sound notification off and the little pop-up window of you've got a new email. Those went off first, and that was hugely helpful. And then I finally got to the point where I only opened my email at certain times of day so that I would be accountable but wouldn't be constantly interrupted. I have all notifications turned off on my phone. I do not have Facebook on my phone. I do have the LinkedIn app, so I can't say that I don't have any social media on my phone, but we can control to some extent, the stimuli that continues to bombard us throughout the day.
And it is hard to do, as you acknowledge, for lawyers who are have screens around them all the time, and the clients expect you to be on call almost sometimes. So it is definitely a challenge. Talk to me a little bit about other ways to overcome the sort of the time pressures and feeling that I'm already overwhelmed. When I get home, all I do is crash. What are some ways that you have found work to re-energize yourself, or reboot, or because everybody has bad days?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I use actually came from another lawyer turned coach, Laura Marr. She's North Carolina based, and she had this great suggestion that I still use, and that is thinking of hats, right? And literally thinking of a hat rack or a coat rack, and visualizing that on my drive home. And I don't have a drive home anymore because I work from home, but when I used to use my drive home as that transition period where I would think of taking my lawyer hat off, hanging it on the invisible coat rack, and then putting, wife or mom hat on as I walked through the door. So um, I often to this day, when I drive, I do not have music or radio on because I'm an introvert, so I need the quiet and the time to process and recharge. So often, if I'm alone in the car, I will use that time to sort of take a deep breath and have a calm, quiet environment. But visualizing sort of taking the hat off or a jacket off as you're switching roles throughout the day, as you're transitioning, that has been helpful for me. Another sort of visualization that I sometimes use is closing my eyes. Sometimes it's resting my forehead like on the desk on my hands and visualizing whatever particular stress or that I'm thinking about. Think of like uh, it's almost like a bird in a cage stuck in my head, and I visualize the cage door opening, and then the worry or the thought or whatever, I visualize it flying away on the wings of the bird. I know that that's a little woo woo for some people, but it can be helpful. Um, I did a lot of legal malpractice defense work when I was litigating. And so a couple of my clients, when they were getting ready to talk with their clients about disclosing a mistake that had been made and the plan to fix it, obviously that's very anxiety producing. And so we talked a little bit about grounding exercises that you can use in a particular moment, either before or during. And some of these, nobody can even tell that you're doing it, right? And so that's anything to sort of bring you back down into your body, because as you likely know, when you're worrying about something, you're not in the present. You're either thinking about something that has already happened, or you're worrying about something that's in the future. So to get you back present into your body and out of the spiraling head that's either thinking backwards or thinking forwards can be grounding. So I teach hands, right? Your hands just being flat on your desk or tabletop and literally feeling the stability of the table underneath you can be calming. You can also press your pads of your fingers into the desk to sort of feel calming, and that can be meditative in and of itself. Your hands can be in your lap and nobody can see that you're doing it, but you can press your thumb to your pads of your other fingers, and that can be very calming. And then just your feet flat on the ground underneath a desk or anywhere on any surface, just feeling your feet from your feet can also be very grounding and centering.
Well, that's awesome. And if you are lucky enough to be in uh, Indiana with the Indiana Legal Services, you get 4 wellness hours per month paid by your employer. That's a group that's prioritizing wellness, and that's another way that a firm can prioritize wellness. Incentivize your team to do good well-being things. So, other comments, Colleen, before we move to the final topic here?
There's a question in the Q&A about speaking with a physician about medications to deal with anxiety, stress, or depression. What type of medications to discuss? I am not a physician, so I don't know about what type of medications, but absolutely. If you feel like if you're having that thought in your head, then yes, you should go speak with somebody, a healthcare provider, whether it is a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I'm not sure. Often, people work with both, right? So if you're thinking prescription, you're obviously going to need an MD. But if usually, my understanding of the industry is that the prescribing the medication piece is supposed to go hand in hand with the talking therapy piece, and that usually the outcomes are better when you, if you're going to use medication, if you're going to make sure to combine it with the therapy piece.
Good stuff. Good stuff. A couple of quick comments from the webinar chat box because the comments are so good. Here's an attendee says, blocking off time in my calendar for both personal and professional appointments is useful. Even things like calling my friend. Here's another one said, my kid's birthday and sporting events. It's easy to talk the talk that home is just as important as work, but walk the walk by blocking that time out to go to your child's soccer game. Here's another one. What about setting a timer to take breaks every 30 to 45 minutes? Colleen, that reminds me again, one of your great bits of advice for me was that whole business of distraction, that every time I'm multitasking, I have to turn my attention back. I lose time when I'm distracted. Well, I don't like to waste time, so that helps keep me focused on one task until I finished it. So some great comments. Thanks, Colleen. And Mike, if you want to tee up the final topic and audience polling question, which of the following are a part of your self-care practice? And you've got some options there. Colleen, any tips on just sort of approaching the whole topic of designing a self-care practice? Is that even a helpful way to put it? Is that a little forbidding?
Yeah, it can feel a little overwhelming if it is perceived as one more thing on my to-do list, or um, recovering perfectionist here, right? That I have to get it perfect, that there's like this big, huge work product thing that I have to like buy a self-care planner and implement this huge process, then I'm never going to do it, right? Um, for me, it comes down to intentionality. How am I going to intentionally take care of myself on a regular basis, right? And there's a lot. I've done a lot of work on self-compassion. So if I can be less rigid about it and I can be expansive and compassionate towards myself about it, that's going to go over a lot better, right? Yes. Would I like to go to the gym every single day, get a really great 60-minute workout in? Sure. But also, I need to not beat myself up if that doesn't happen every single day, right? So, this intentionality of approaching it with, I'm going to do the best I can to fill my cup in whatever small way that might be. Oh, these are some great questions coming into the Q&A.
Well, and some of the
How do
good
we
comments too. Here's another comment saying, yes, blocking out personal matters is important, but you got to actually go to those events. You got to actually honor it and do it. Um, Here's one comment that says, Jay is talking too much. I love that. If we're going to talk the talk about holding a mirror up, we got to be able to listen when somebody says, hey, let Colleen talk. So Colleen, talk to me.
Okay, so how do we reduce procrastination of legal tasks? You've got to get curious about what's causing the procrastination, right? What are you resisting? So we got to peel back the layers of the onion there. So whoever wrote that, if you could give me a little bit more, maybe we can sort of figure out, are we feeling like we don't have all the tools and the resources we need to tackle it? Are we feeling like we would rather be in a different career and that's why we're avoiding it? Are we avoiding it because it's a really ugly client? Like what is the thing behind the thing, right? What is peeling back the layers of the onion? And what's the narrative? What's the monologue going on inside your head about it that will help us figure out where to go from there? Um, Thoughts on short naps. So I have never been a napper. Um, there have been times where I have wished that I was a napper. There have been times where I am envious of other people in my life who are nappers. If napping, if short naps are productive for you, in other words, if they recharge you, awesome, go for it. For me, it took so long to fall asleep, and then I didn't feel rested afterward that it was not helpful for me. So I think you have to see, is it, with everything, with all of these tips, are they helping me or not? And if they're not, throw them out the window and don't do them, right? Um, let's see. How do you control how people manage your time, especially if you're a junior attorney? My workload is crazy, but I have very little say in this. I can put all the best self care practices in place, but it's not useful if no one respects it. Yeah. Um, yeah. You need to have a candid conversation about expectations and about reality, right? So, um, just because you're a junior attorney, it doesn't mean that you don't have a voice to say, let's figure out what's the expectation, what's the reality, how do we accomplish everything that needs to get accomplished, what's the timeline, maybe you need more support, maybe your team needs more support, maybe your team needs more better processes, better systems in place. um, so with that, that's a whole coaching conversation around how to have a difficult conversation with somebody who's superior to you. And some of the quick tips on that are leading with your why, right? Starting with, you know, this is starting with, I care about client service and I really want to do a good job. And also, it doesn't seem like things are working. So let's figure out where we need to make adjustments. Um, Similar question with, how do you communicate with your supervisor if your workload is not manageable, um, and with other attorneys, right? And so I think it's helpful to have the data. So if you could sort of spend, I know you don't have the time to do it, but set aside some time to look at, here's the number of cases that I'm juggling right now. Here's the billable hours that I'm putting in, or here's the non-billable work that I'm doing, right? So what is the state of the union? What does the picture actually look like from the data? And then figure out where tweaks might need to be made, what support might need to come in. Are you doing things that should be delegated to somebody else, right? Sometimes when we're junior, we end up doing things that really should actually be pushed to a paralegal or an assistant. And for whatever reason, we're not doing that. So those are other places to look at efficiencies. And then is there a system or a process that could be put in place that could improve the workflow? Um,
Okay, I'm going to
okay,
jump in and tell
go ahead.
Mike this would be a good time to drop Colleen's contact info in the chat box or the Q&A, wherever you drop it. In fact, one attendee just requested that. Another attendee says, Colleen is the best. Thank you for giving her an opportunity to present this to us again this year. You're welcome, and we are grateful as well. Colleen?
Yeah. And so another question, we were going to get to some apps. So I have a list of, there's an app for that, um, to help. So Calm is a good one. I really like Headspace. I'm kind of partial to the British accent, and the little characters, the cartoon characters. They make understanding mindfulness very, easy and accessible. Um, Insight Timer is another meditation app. Um, YouTube, Michael Sealey, Sealey. Um, he does guided meditations. He also does some hypnosis. So I'm not trained in hypnosis, so I can't weigh in on that piece of it. But I have found his guided meditations to be very relaxing. And sometimes if I have trouble sleeping, um, putting it in my earbuds and listening to it will help me fall asleep. Whether he's hypnotizing me or not, I am uncertain. Um, don't do it while driving. Um, a little bit about some breathing techniques. There is a link to, a guided meditation for free on my website, buyersmediation.com. I think it's under like speaking or training, tab to find the free guided meditation. I think it's box breathing. I can't remember. Um, Starfish breathing. So my children taught me starfish breathing, which is very easy. Your hand is like a star for the starfish, and you inhale up, exhale down, inhale up, exhale down, inhale up, exhale all the way around your star hand. And then rainbow breathing is you just make a rainbow with your arms and you inhale and exhale. Um, so those are some things you can do without an app, but those were some of the apps. Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer, and then Michael Seeley is on YouTube. Someone in the chat uses Balance for an app,
I
but
see
likes,
Balance, Headspace. I also saw more than one comment on difficulty saying no, telling people no. And that's a refrain I've heard over the years. Lawyers have trouble sometimes saying no.
yeah. So I hear you. I used to have a lot of trouble saying no. I have less trouble now, but I still have trouble, right? So again, sort of adjusting expectations about, what is your goal, right? Is your goal to always say no, or is it just to notice maybe to say it less frequently? So a couple of things that helped me on boundaries and saying no, because saying no is just a boundary, right? So one is Dr. Brene Brown says that clear is kind. And so that has always been really compelling to me because sometimes I don't say no because I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings or I don't want something to be misperceived. But like, really, if I just think of what is the most clear and kind answer right now, right, that will usually guide me well. And then the other helpful thing that I saw, and this is not mine, I saw it on somewhere, I can't remember where, but it was something like a boundary is the distance where I can love you and me at the same time, right? And so, really thinking of honoring and respecting both yourself and the other person has sort of helped me with boundaries and saying no, right? And then, honestly, just being a woman in this profession, I also looked around and thought, man, some of the men in my firm are really good at looking out for themselves. So instead of resenting that, I need to emulate it, and that has helped too.
Hey, we're always learning, right? Always learning. Final comment. It strikes me, Colleen, how much, because we got a lot of questions, how much of well-being and stress boils down to communication, because we got a lot of questions about communicating with my boss, communicating with my staff. Um, and I know that you're good at that. So I would encourage our attendees, if you have further questions on those issues, feel free to reach out to Colleen after the program. So thanks, Todd. Turning it over to you.
Grinch has arrived. So, so the session will be closing in a couple of minutes. First and foremost, after the webinar closes down, the survey will pop up, or when you leave, it should pop up as well. If you don't want to stay for the extra 5 or 10 minutes that Colleen and Jay will be standing by. The link to the survey will be in the post emails and open for 72 hours, so you can take it. The second code word is holidays. So the first code word is happy. The second code word is holidays. And I want to express our sincere gratitude to both you, Colleen, and Jay. This is always a wonderful session for even folks that are not lawyers like myself. Personally, I'm a big believer in calendar blocking, and I frequently use calendar blocking for my afternoon nap. So I'm a big believer in that too. So for those questions, I hear you. And of course, a big thank you to everybody who took time to participate. Without you, the webinar series just wouldn't be as successful or as much fun as it always is. So don't forget, Colleen and Jay will be staying on for another 10 minutes if you have a question. And so with that, I'm going to bid my adieu and wish best wishes for the great holiday season for everybody. All righty. Thank you.
All right, so there's a question about delegating tasks. That's probably a whole our CLE by itself, as well as practice, 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 right? So first you got to look at why. Why are you, what are you resisting? Why are you not delegating it? And start unpacking that. And then I would say start with small things, right? If it's because you don't you worry about the work product, or you worry about trusting somebody to do it, then let's start with small things to give that person, to build up that confidence. Um, Maybe look at um, what are some repetitive things that they could practice on, making sure that you give enough time. So whatever the deadline is for them, that there's enough time for you to then review it, right? So don't create a crisis where the time, don't add to the time crunch problem. Um, and just knowing that delegating initially is not efficient. It's the long-term result that ultimately helps you save time, and also, empower and train who's coming up behind you, whether that is staff or other attorneys. How to deal with always being on. Clients and family always expect you to have the answer or be the one with everything together. Yeah, that's really hard. I've gotten really good, particularly as a mediator and a coach, right? It's not my responsibility to solve the problem. And so I would just encourage you that if you are not in an attorney-client relationship where you have some sort of fiduciary duty and responsibility, that you empower yourself, that to give yourself a break, right? When you are in a personal relationship with family or whatnot, and you don't actually have the responsibility, that you get to have a chance of not being responsible, right? And with with family and friends, a lot of times I'll listen and I'll reflect back and I'll say, yeah, that sounds really hard, right? And the less that I try to solve their problems, the less they're going to keep coming to me to solve their problems, right? And so the more questions that I ask them about, well, what do you want to do? Or what's your plan? Or, you know, how are you going to go forward? Um, that will start teaching them to not come to you for all of the answers on a silver platter. And I saw a great post from somebody on LinkedIn recently who said something like, I have a standard line of, oh, that's not my area of law, or, something. They said it a lot more humorously than I just did, but sort of, I don't know, that's not my area of expertise.
I'll throw in a comment on having to be owned. I have an adult child who is a classroom teacher, and she says that's one of the biggest stresses of the job. You got to show up, and you got to be uh, you at least have to be somewhat present, at least standing upright and be on. And if you really want to do a good job, as she does, you have to be performing. You have to be shining, and that's hard sometimes. Um, and then I remember when I was actively practicing, people didn't expect me so much to have the answer, but they would want to run legal questions by me. And sometimes they would get sort of irritated or put off if I told them I'm not interested, or don't do that, or it's not a good idea, or come see me in the office and pay my retainer, whatever. But it's a lot easier now that I can say I'm not even actively licensed. So I'm not a lawyer. I can't help you. It's much easier. But I sort of get the having to be on, because you're seen a certain way. You wear a certain mask, and that mask can be persuasive. And but there's more behind the mask, and that's the key, I think.
Yeah, and some of it is how are we setting the expectations from the initial consultation, right? So the very first time that we interact with a client, we're setting the tone and the stage, right? And so yes, we're in a service industry, we need to have good customer service, but it's also reasonable and fine to set expectations, right? I.e., I respond to emails at 10 a.m., noon, and 4 p.m. or whatever, right? And you can say, I use block, um, I block my time, whatever the principles are, right? So that I can be the most efficient and effective for all my clients. And so, you know, here's what you can expect from me, right? You can expect a response within 24 hours, right? But then don't give them the response outside of that window, because you're teaching them that you can just respond at the tip of a fingertip. I had someone share one time in a CLE, that they tell their clients that they have it's time and a half their hourly rate if their clients expect a response on the weekend or at night, right? It's only one attendee has ever told me that, but I thought that was interesting. So I don't know how common it is, but my point is, set the expectation early on and then stick with it so that you don't have to be constantly bending over backward.
Well, and lawyers often don't do a very good job of that. They say, I'm here for you, or I'm there when you call. And then you sign up and hire them, and maybe not as much. They're there for me. They're on to the next, they're getting the next case or whatever. I know, I've been there. Um, but in some ways, things haven't changed, because I remember years ago, I worked for a lawyer who was a terrific lawyer, would never have heard of the words like self-care and all of that, but he had no trouble telling, setting expectations with clients and being very assertive and saying, here's when you can come into the office, and here's how you will treat my staff, and here's how you will address my whatever. And uh, clear communication. And I don't recall there being any repercussions from losing clients. Maybe he did, but he probably was happy he lost them. But he also was a pretty stress-free. He liked what he did. He enjoyed practicing law, and I was lucky to work for a lawyer who loved what he did and was very good at it, straight out of the chute, And so that was a good model for me. And then I'm not sure this is in the chat box, but the comments are so good, I'm just going to parrot them in case, I guess everybody can see the chat, so I don't need to parrot them, but they're on sort of scripts for telling clients no. I'm not taking new cases, not the right lawyer to help you, yada, yada. And some of this we've heard before, but it helps just to have a little script and say it, period, boom. Move on to the next thing in your life.
Yeah, I had a coach or a colleague, I can't remember which one, say, if you're evaluating something, let's say you're asked to sit on a board, you're asked to speak for free, something that you're not immediately fired up about, you're likely not going to be fired up about it a month from now either, right? So if you're not a full yes in the moment, then probably not the right fit for you, right? And having a script I really like to give 100% to everything that I commit to, and I just can't add that. I just can't do that in this case, so I have to decline. Sometimes if you can suggest somebody else, then that helps you feel better about letting them down. I can't devote the attention to this that the board deserves, but have you thought about, this other colleague, in the bar?
Great point. And there are a couple of comments on going with your gut feeling of just don't take on this client. Again, easy for Santa to say that when I'm not the one having to pay the rent in your law office. But often going with your gut. And I think it's when you don't follow your gut or your instinct, that's when you get indigestion and you get headaches and your well-being suffers. At least I'm speaking from experience here. Listening to that little voice in your head telling you to say no and you say yes. I mean, we've all been there. And it isn't just the saying no. I don't want to get stuck on that. How do you turn away clients? But it really is how to do things that you're not really comfortable doing, which you're called upon to do as a lawyer. I mean, that's your job sometimes. So, and it can kind of tie you in a knot perhaps, or wear you out or drain you of your energy. So all of these are great comments.
There was a question, do we know of any other states that give wellness hours from an employer? I don't know, and I don't know of a resource that tracks that. But I would say whatever jurisdiction you're in, reach out to the state bar association, the local bar association, the whoever's your insurance carrier, your legal malpractice insurance carrier, reach out to them, see if they know. Reach out to your health insurance. Sometimes they have wellness programs that they don't particularly advertise, but if you ask, they'll connect you.
Okay, I think we are about ready to wrap it up here. We've got what's a final question. I think we've talked enough about communication, but I did want to address the issue of saying no to clients or client selection. And this is a little off topic, but maybe it isn't, because I think it causes stress and anxiety in law firms. It's really important to pick the right clients. I'm speaking here as the risk pro now, and not so much as a wellness guy. And really go with your gut if you don't feel right taking the client. In my prior life, I represented lawyers who were in trouble with the bar. I represented lawyers who had been sued by their former clients and in trouble with the bar. And I never met one who said, "Oh, I knew this was a great case or a great client from the start." And I felt great about it from day one. They all pretty much said, "I knew I shouldn't have taken that case," or "I knew it was going to be a mess," or "I knew it was going to be trouble." So there was a little self-awareness there, but it was pushed aside for the money or whatever. So that's the risk management takeaway I get from this discussion is never heard lawyers really regret, taking good cases, but when cases they get in trouble with, they always say, "I knew there was something about it." Or anyway, I'll shut up there.
Yeah.
And
Last question. What about going on sabbatical? Is there a way to do that? Yes, there is. Is it easy? No, it's not. Get some support, hire a coach if you'd like, reach out to your malpractice carrier. They may have ideas or a particular program to help with that. There's obviously a difference if you practice solo or not in the, how to do that and the mechanics of that. But yes, it may not happen overnight. It may take a good amount of planning to get your cases postured so that you can take a sabbatical. And it also kind of depends on how long, right? But, speaking from somebody who has taken 2 different maternity leaves, right? One was 3 months, another one was 4 months. It's very doable. It just requires lots of communication, advanced planning, and, careful consideration of everything. And then of course you have to look at how that's going to impact your finances. But the benefit on the well-being side, hopefully will make it worthwhile. So yes, absolutely, it can be done. So thank you, everyone. Yeah.
That's all from here. Colleen, last word. Thank you again. Last word for you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a great holiday and take care of yourselves.